Log entry, Sol 6. I'm pretty much effed. That's my considered opinion. Effed. 6 days into what should be the greatest month of my life, and it's turned into a nightmare. I don't even know who'll read this. I guess someone will find it eventually, maybe 100 years from now. For the record, I didn't die on Sol 6. Certainly the rest of the crew thought I did, and I can't blame them. Maybe there'll be a day of national mourning for me, and my Wikipedia page will say Mark Watney is the only human being to have died on Mars. And it'll be right, probably, because I'll surely die here. Just not on Sol 6 when everyone thinks I did. Hello, 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 my friends. Welcome to WriteHive 2024. And this panel is first page analysis with literary professionals. I'm going to be your host today, Nicolas W. Fuller. I'm a writer working on debuts, and I am a booktuber. But you're not here for me. You're here for our wonderful guests. We'll get into some introductions in just a second. Let me also say WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The conference this year is packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. If you want more content similar to this topic, you can check out Beyond Agent Submission Survival from 2022 WriteHive Conference or How to Land a Literary Agent from the 2020 WriteHive Conference. Yes, WriteHive has been doing this for a while, and it is awesome. You should check out all the things. I'm joined today by Lauren Davila, Shannon Lechon, and Sandra Proudman. Let me kind of go in that same order, and if you guys can introduce yourselves and give me a little bit more of your background, please. Starting with Lauren.
Perfect. So my name is Lauren Davila. I am a Latina author, anthologist, and editor. I have a couple of short story anthologies out, including my most recent one. I did pick the right side here. So my most recent one, To Root Somewhere Beautiful, an anthology of reclamation, which just came out with Outland Entertainment in March of 2024. I have quite a few pieces of poetry and short fiction published as well. And I am also the acquisitions editor at Inked in Gray Press. So I'm actively acquiring genre fiction specifically from historically marginalized writers. I live in the Los Angeles area and I like to swim a lot and walk my golden retriever.
Good hobbies. Who doesn't like a good dog and a nice swim, you know? Like, all right, Shannon, go for it.
My name is Shannon Lechon. I'm a queer Mexican-American agent who currently works at Azantian Literary. Before that, I worked with Kate Creative doing book packaging for intellectual property work. I did a brief stint in editorial at Penguin Random House before I decided that was not quite for me. And now I've been with my current agency for about 2 years last week. And I'm very, very happy to be here. At my agency, I represent adult, young adult, and middle grade science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, horror, all sorts of cool, fun genre fiction. I focus on things that are kind of offbeat, strange, and genre blending. If it's weird and wonderful, I want it in my inbox. I live in Jersey City, although I'm originally from South Florida, and I'm moving to New York again in the fall. So that is basically my whole shtick.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Shannon. And Sandra?
Yeah, hi everybody. I love that we're all Latinas here. It's amazing. But I am Sandra Proudman. I am a literary associate and agent at Galton Zacher Literary Agency, and there I represent everything from picture book author illustrators through adult speculative fiction. So a little bit of everything because that's what I love. And I've been agenting for a little over a year now, and can't share announcements yet, but more announcements to come from my wonderful clients. But I am also an author. I'm the editor and a contributor to Relit, 16 lively mixes of classic stories. I'm also a contributor to the House of Death Lives. Oh, now, oh, that was weird. Okay. Let's see. Could I get it on the screen? I can't get it on the screen, but I'm also a contributor to the House Where Death Lives. And I also have my first full-length novel coming out next year, which I just found out we're changing the name, but right now it's called, I know. Right now it's called Salvacion, and it is a gender swap sorrow retelling, magical realism, slow burn romance, salt magic, all the big fun and horse adventures. So I'm really excited about that, and that's coming out sometime next year, but keep an eye out for information there. And I'm really excited to join today to talk about first pages, because I feel like the first page is like an elusive thing that's important and all the fun stuff. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Love that. That sounds like a really fun read, by the way. But yeah, first page. I wanted to open with the first page of one of my favorite books, The Martian with Andy Weir, just jumping right into it. But really, I mean, and you say that it's important, and I hear you, but how important is the first page of a story really? I mean, it's only one page out of like a few hundred, right? I mean, is it that important? What do you guys think? You want Sandra, you want to start that? Because it seems like you have opinions on it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is right now, right before right before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit about how the year has gone by so quickly, right? And I feel like when we talk about first pages and when we talk about gripping people's attention, you kind of need to do that right away because time is so limited. And I don't know what it is about the last few years, if it was, the pandemic or everything just like on top of each other. But for some reason, I feel like, at least for myself, like I don't have that much time to read. I don't have that much time to really devote my time. I have a toddler now who's 3 years old. And so he takes up a lot of my time. And so I'm being even more and more selective with the things that I read. And that first page for me is going to tell me whether, this is a story and a book and the characters are worth investing my valuable time in, or if I need to find something else.
Love that. Team three-nager parent also. High five. Yep. Shannon, what do you think? I mean, are you making big decisions as an acquiring literary agent on the first page? Is it that important?
Yes, absolutely to me. Even before I got into the official publishing world at all, I was a bookseller for many years. I worked at the biggest Barnes& and Noble in the USA over in Union Square in New York. And so I know what readers want, and I feel really confident saying that. And I watched for years as people would open up a book to the first page, read the first sentence, close it, and put it back on the shelf. And I watched them do that every single day for years of my life. So I know, not only as an agent, I'm trying to predict what readers want, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again. So I know out in the market, out in the real world, the first page is just as important to readers as it is to me. So I have to place a lot of emphasis on exactly what you say right off the bat. Otherwise, how are you going to grab a reader's attention? How are you going to make them buy that book?
Wow. Opening it up and reading just the first sentence. That's all they're gonna give it, huh? Oof, man, rough. All right, Lauren, I'm sure I see a lot of nodding, so I'm sure you kind of feel the same way as what has been said.
Yeah, I feel like I can echo that, and I feel like I think I like to liken it. I think it's a social media thing that just in today's day and age, like you want that immediacy like right away. And maybe it comes from, like TikTok scrolling where you like immediately see the quote or the quip or whatever it is. But I just think, especially in today's day and age, you don't necessarily have the ability to have I don't know, like Jane Austen lush, descriptors that take up a couple paragraphs right off the bat. So I think those first pages, it it's really important. I think that's both for the writer, but especially for the reader and the audience.
Yep, understood. All right, let me give like hopefully kind of a quick question. We'll run around in the same order for each of you. I'd love to hear you answer. Like, I'd love to hear a ballpark of like percentage of roughly, what amount of your rejections that because each of you are acquiring work, either as your capacity as a literary agent or an acquiring editor. So what percentage of your rejections do you make just based on that first page? You don't read any more. Sandra, we'll start with you.
So I'll say I always read everything, but I will tell you, like right away from the first page, I probably know where it's headed, probably like 95% of the time.
Yeah.
Because the first page will really, I think we'll get a little bit more into everything with the first page, but the first page really gives me a sense of the voice, the character, the writing style, it already gives you like a sense of so much that it gives you an idea of everything outside of where the plot is going almost. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would say probably a high percentage for me will tell me right away after the first page. But that's not to say it's like 100%. A lot of the times, like I mentioned, I always read everything that I'm sent. And so a lot of the times, like I typically ask for a first chapter because I want to know where it's going, right? I want to know like how the chapter ends. And so I do consider the whole thing that I'm submitted, but that first page gives me a really good sense already if I'm going to like the writing or not.
Okay, so like 99%. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon?
Yeah, so I asked for the first 10 pages of a manuscript when I asked people to submit to me.
Hmm.
And mine is more like half I would know by the first page. I do tend to read all of them, just like Sandra, but like she said, like I kind of know where it's going by the first page. I know if I'm gonna love it or not. I want to give things a chance, so I always read all of it, but I know what's going on pretty much right away. I'll also say that it depends a lot for me on like genre conventions. If I'm reading something that I know is supposed to be a more commercial action-packed story, like I am going to be judging things right away because that's what the genre expectation is. But if you
Sure.
send me like a literary gothic, like I'm going to give the heroine like 2 pages to wander the moors and think about her life before I'm really judging things, you know? So it all depends on exactly what you're writing as well.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And Lauren?
I love that. I'm just like, let them wander the moors. Like I'm gonna use that as I'm going through submissions now, Shannon. I think I'm probably maybe a little bit less than well, probably I would say 50%. I feel like that's a pretty good number to land on. I think for me, I know at Inked, we normally ask for the first 3 chapters, and then we also ask for a synopsis. So I feel like I lend a little bit more weight to the synopsis in terms of plot. I want to see the overarching arcs. But as with both what Sandra and Shannon have said, your voice is so important, especially I think in genre spaces. So for me, that's where I think I get the most insight in that first page. Like it tells me a lot about voice specifically. So and I also think some of the time I will weed out some stories that they're maybe just like on a craft level, just aren't where they need to be yet. I know at Inked we take both agented and unagented subs, and I would say most of the time that comes from unagented, obviously. But I think that's, I don't want to say necessarily form rejection, but I'll always say, maybe work on your craft a little bit more. Some of the time it's just, syntax, writing, spelling, punctuation. So some of the time I just know that I won't necessarily have the time to devote to really fix that story up, unfortunately.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that interesting. I think I think a lot of new writers especially kind of struggle with this because they're like, how could they judge my work on like that first page? But I guess if it's that sort of thing that you're mentioning now, where like there's fundamental problems with the way that they're communicating in the written language, and it's gonna like even if there's ideas of the story are fantastic, it's gonna take so much work just to go in and edit and fix like, a bunch of typos, a bunch of grammatical mistakes, that sort of thing, then it's not worth it. So that's really interesting. And that I could definitely see, yeah, if the first page is littered with that, red flags are getting thrown, right? Right. Um, okay. So, and you kind of, especially Sandra, you talked on this a little bit, but um, the kind of question is, why is this so important? And what can a first page actually predict about the rest of the story? Like how much I guess like clearly you're not looking at the first page to get an understanding of the plot of a whole book, right? But you are looking at that first page for specific things that, and you were starting to mention some of that, Sandra. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first page gives you a really good sense of who the character is because of what they say or what they do on that page, right? And so we automatically already kind of start to get to know this character. And I think the first page gives us sometimes that even gives us an idea of the problem that they're going to be facing because we're put into the starting of the plot, right, in some capacity. But for me, I think first pages are also great to see character dynamics. So sometimes you have first pages where you get to see the interaction between characters and you get to know like that dynamic right away, right? And so I think it gives you a really good sense of typically a setting, the character's personality a little bit, the voyage that they're going to be taking, maybe depending on the genre, etc., like Shannon was mentioning. And so I think the first page is really there to ground the reader into the story and the character. And so that's typically what I'm looking for, again, is seeing how grounded do I feel in the story, like how immersed do I feel right away, how much do I feel like this is a character whose journey I can follow because of something either that they say or something that they do in that opening page.
Great. Love it. Shannon, like same question. What are kind of the things that you're really looking for in that first page?
Well, Sandra absolutely killed that answer. So she covered pretty much everything I was going to say about craft and tone and character and voice. Like that is essentially how you set up the rest of the book. And that first page is going to be crucial to how your person, your agent, your editor, whoever that may be, sees the rest of your story. But I'm also going to say it lets me know how well you know your market. Like us as agents and editors are always subject to the whims of the market. Like I was saying, like that reader, do you know your audience well enough to entrap them in the first page? Like if you're writing a middle grade novel, are you voicey? Are you funny enough to be capturing their attention over, like Lauren said, like over TikTok? We are competing in a day and age of so many things that grab their attention. Are you able to accurately predict that market? Are you able to grab their attention? If you're writing for a literary audience, are you able to, you know, transpose all the feelings and the big emotions that come with literary fiction? Do you know your market? Do you know your genre well? And this all comes from, do you read very broadly in your genre as well? It's why I always tell people who like want to be writers, like you have to read, I promise it's really helpful. Because that's how you know your market. That's how you know the genre conventions that you're expected of. So that's another thing for me.
Okay. And Lauren, again.
I don't know if I have much to add there. I was like, okay, I'll talk a little bit about genre conventions, but I think Shannon hit it on the head there because, I feel like if somebody is working in young adult spaces specifically, I would expect on the first page to see like a really strong internal voice or something that feels really like immediate to characterization. If somebody's working in gothic or horror, I want to see that, experience of suspense or like some tension that's being brought forth. So I think, you know, being aware of market, being aware of genre, being aware of voice. And, Sandra and Shannon hit it on the head. I don't necessarily know I have too much to add there because I think that those are the things that we want to see that you understand. Not that you can't work on them, with your agent or your editor respectively, but at least that you get a little nugget of what it will be.
Right. All right. So yeah, with that first page, you guys are really honing in on like voice and character and also the ability to get, the attention and understanding genre. Makes sense. Let me go in the other order so that maybe Lauren will have more of a chance to but I'd love to hear a little bit of some of your favorite first pages for each of you. Like maybe, if you have a first page that comes to mind, what obviously I read from The Martian and I think that one's doing a lot of work. But what are one of your favorite first pages, Lauren?
Yeah, so actually I had two that I was thinking of, especially with genre and voice, and I think they parallel really well. So the first one is We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. And then the second one, which is it's in the same vein, is the beginning of We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I think both capture young adult voices very well. For We've Always Lived, they both have sort of an explanation of who the character is told by the character themselves. So, like, We Have Always Lived in the Castle starts with, my name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I'm 18 years old. I live with my sister. And then goes through some, I hate this. I like dogs. And it ends with everybody in my family is dead. And that's just like the opening of the story. It sets the scene really well. And for a more contemporary take, E. Lockhart explores sort of that same vein, starting off, my full name is Cadence St. Clair Eastman, goes through, I'm blonde, strong, I suffer migraine, sense of the accident, bringing in sort of that tension that's established. But I think both very strong voices, a very strong sense of immediacy, really, really strong characterization, and both have, a little bit of a what's happening here. It makes you want to keep reading as a reader. So those were the two that I could think of as some standout first pages. I've taught both of these books before, so I feel like I've been able to see how people interact with them and want to keep reading it, definitely.
Very cool. I really appreciate examples, and I think hopefully the audience will, and I'm sure that they can go check these out on like an Amazon preview or that sort of thing, even much less having to kind of go pick up the book. Let me push on you a little bit on that, as I'm curious about one specific thing. In both of those examples, you're kind of talking about how the main character is sort of like describing themselves, right? And I've heard that as something that is often an indicator of poor writing, because you don't want to necessarily have like your character getting ready in the morning going like, oh, look at my blue eyes in the morning, you know what I mean? So how did those authors do it in a way that worked for you? What made that good when they're sort of, in my mind, like uh uh not following a rule, you know?
Yeah, so I think for me, the thing that stands out to both of these is they're very poetic in scope.
Okay.
The way that they're sort of told is like very fragmented sentences, and it, I think, is as kind of as we talked, like sets up the rest of the book respectively. So it carries that sort of craft throughout. And I think it's also, for me at least, the way that they characterize themselves is very different from how the other characters would necessarily characterize themselves. So I think it just says a lot about distance for the reader from the character versus everybody else in the novel. So I think, though, maybe it's from an editor perspective, you want to read more, writer perspective, you will want to read more. So I will
Right.
say, I'm sure some of the time it might not work, but I think that these two are great examples of when it does work.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, that first one, like the rest of my family is dead. I'm trying to
Mhm.
go, okay. Like,
Mhm.
you know that meme with DiCaprio from the movie where you had my attention, but now you have my interest, you know? Like, all right, Shannon, same question. A couple of your favorite opening pages.
Sure. I actually did have a comment also for Lauren, is
Please,
that
please.
to me it reads a little bit differently when you mentioned that she gets migraines now because she has an accident. Like that to me feels different than a character standing in front of a mirror describing their hair color and their eye color. Like that is a descriptor that makes me want to read more, while your blue eyes in the morning and your blonde hair in the mirror does not necessarily make me want to read more. There's no intrigue there. So I just
Perfect.
wanted to add that because I haven't read that book and now I'm intrigued just by you saying that. So I just want to throw that in there. But for my two examples, I picked two very contrasting adult FFF samples. So the first one is going to be Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. And that has an opening line, which I have copied here, and I will do a dramatic reading of. Um, in the myriadic year of our Lord, the 10,000th year of the King Undying, the kindly Prince of Death, Gideon Nav packed her sword, her shoes, and her dirty magazines, and she escaped from the house of the Ninth. And that to me is just the perfect encapsulation of what that book is going to be. It has a very irreverent tone, especially with that middle proclamation about this king that we know nothing about. And it gives us immediately so much character. We know she has a big sword. We know that she's escaping from somewhere. And we know that she's bringing her pornography with her. And that to me tells me so much about who that girl is. And if you have read the rest of the book, or if you haven't, that's the whole tone of the book. The whole tone of the book is very strange. She continues to be really weird and kind of thirsty. And that to me is just how you set up a character. And the whole first page is like that. You get this sort of internal narration that continues in that same vein. And so I feel like I'm getting a really accurate picture of what this book is going to be. And that book is pretty divisive. So if a person picks up that book and reads that first sentence and puts it back down, they're making the right decision. Like, you know that that first line is putting you off of the rest of the book, and the rest of the book is exactly what that first line is. You wouldn't have liked it anyway, so I don't feel bad that that person is putting it down. So that was one of my examples. And the second one, contrasting, is the opening of The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. The first line is, the circus comes without warning. I don't have it in front of me. And then it details the whole setting of the circus and how mysterious it is. There's no characters, there's no plot. It's just a description of this mysterious circus. And again, I feel like that's a perfect encapsulation of what that book is going to be about. It's lyrical, it's poetic, it's beautiful, but also it's a book about the power of setting and about the way that the circus affects the people in the novel rather than almost vice versa. So I feel again that that is exactly what you're getting into. It's a perfect encapsulation of what the rest of the book is going to be. And the writing is gorgeous. And it's a beautiful, gorgeous, poetic book. So again, yeah.
I love that. I love that you mentioned too that like I think a good first page not only grabs the right reader, but it also does actually turn off the person that's not gonna like the whole thing, because you're probably, even if you're doing that, you're probably saving yourself a bad review, right? All right, Sandra, go ahead. Please, some of your favorite first pages.
Yeah, so I have two too. So this question automatically just made me go to the Hunger Games, right? I think that opening scene with Katniss is so I have it here. So it goes, when I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold. My fingers stretch out, seeking Prim's warmth, but fighting only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. She must have had bad dreams and climbed in with our mother. Of course she did. This is the day of the reaping. And I think that paragraph alone tells us so much, right? It gives us an intrigue where it's like, this is the day of the reaping. So automatically you're just like, what is the reaping? I need to keep reading in order to find out what this is, even though the next section of it we won't find out till like later on, right? But I loved that it gives you so many details, right? It gives you details about Katniss and her relationship with Prim, how she needs her for warmth, right? It's not that Prim needs Katniss for warmth, Katniss needs Prim for warmth. And that's so that automatically gives you a sense of, yeah. And now we know like the relationship between Prim and Katniss, right? After having read the books and movies, etc. And we see that, but I love that this opening paragraph gives you a sense of what the character really needs to survive, right? Almost, and after we know about more about their relationship, we know that, but right from the bat, we get a sense of that relationship, and we also get a sense of the world that they're living in, just by knowing that all three of them are in the same room, right? And so Candace doesn't tell us, oh, Prim, my sister, goes into the bed with my mom and my dad, says my mom. So automatically you kind of know, okay, so this is a single parent that we're dealing with. We know that the mattress is rough canvas cover. And so it already gives us a sense of the setting, what the characters are dealing with, and the relationship that they have with each other. And so I think this is such a strong way of establishing so many things just from one paragraph, right? And so that was one example that I wanted to give. And then the other example I have is from, I love Soraya Cordova. This is from Bruja Born, which is number 2 of the Brooklyn Bruja series. But it starts off with, this is a love story. At least it was before my sister sent me to hell. And so just from those 2 little sentences, right, you have this idea of like, okay, this is not what I expected from this book. And then she goes into a little bit about the family's, book of cantos, which is really intriguing. So, they're brujas, they have a book of encantos, a family, but it ends with a really lovely interaction between, again, sisters, and some sense of family, like I mentioned earlier. I'm really intrigued by that. So this is, I think, Lula. And so Alex, her, I think, older sister comes in and it's like, Lula, you ready? My sister Alice asks. I stare at my open closet and can't find the socks that go with my step team uniform. I ruffle through bins of underwear and mismatched socks and costume jewelry. Lula, Alex repeats softly this time. And so again, that sense of character, right? We know that Lula has mismatched socks, which is really cute and intriguing, but we also get a sense of like their relationship just by that addition of softly this time, right, at the end. And so again, just working with like your diction and your dialogue and those character interactions right from the first page will really give you a sense of who you're following and the family structure and the character structure that you have there. And at the end of the day, those characters are really going to be what keeps the reader intrigued and what keeps agents and editors intrigued. And from the bat, having that first page set up in a way where automatically a reader can start rooting for the characters on the page, that is kind of a lovely way to keep the reader intrigued, right?
Nice. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So I mean, already just sort of a lot to think about, so these different like first pages. But I think one of the through lines, of course, throughout the whole conversation so far is like the voice and the characters connecting with the characters, right? Um, I think we've kind of touched on this, but how essential is a hook on the first page? And then also like with that kind of, I think I know what a hook is, but how do you, as someone that's a publishing professional, how do you define a hook? Let's start with Lauren and go around in that order again.
Ooh. I feel like the hook is so nebulous. I feel like I don't necessarily have like the perfect definition.
Right.
I feel like for me personally, I don't necessarily think that you need the hook on the first page. I think that you're maybe establishing something a little bit more immediate rather than just the hook. I think the hook for me, at least from a reader, author, publishing professional specifically, should be very clear in description and or synopsis and or query for a writer. I think what we've established for voice or narrative or, characterization, for me at least, is a little bit more important than a hook on the first page. Something that brings the reader in should be, though, within, I would say, well, maybe this is just from how I view it in each one. First 3 chapters, like within that time, you should be setting up sort of the overall arc. So I think for me, it's a little more genre specific. Every once in a while that might be pushed a little bit later. For
Sure.
why I expect it to be a little bit sooner than, let's say, by the 3rd chapter. But overall, within the first couple pages, I don't necessarily think that you should say, though, like hard line. That
Sure.
needs to be on the first page. I just don't think there's enough space there to have the whole hook be present.
Fair. No hard lines, but eventually at some point we got to stop wandering in the moors. Okay.
You got exactly reel the heroine back in from the
Right.
moors.
Right.
Call her home.
Call her home. Yeah. Okay. Shannon, same question.
Yeah, so when I think of a hook, I think of like those first sentences that like grab people's attention. And maybe I'll go against the grain, but I kind of don't really like them at all. I feel like sort of what I was talking about earlier is I want a first page to feel like a really good encapsulation of the rest of the book. I want to know what I'm getting into, and I want it to be like an accurate representation of what I'm going to be seeing going forward. And I read a lot of books or submissions where the first line or the first paragraph is super hooky and it's super catchy and it has like all these cool fun elements to it, and then the tone changes dramatically as the story goes on, because authors have been told you need this hook, you need this attention grabbing bit in the beginning to get people's attention. And then I'm like, well, if that hook doesn't match up to the rest of your story, it just reads kind of awkward and out of place. So if you are going to have a hook, kind of like in the Gideon the Night sample that I did, I do think that's a very flashy first sentence. But the rest of the book is also super flashy and over the top. So it tracks that you would have that kind of first sentence there. So I don't think I really want a hook. I want sort of like what Lauren was saying, things to sort of pull me in within the first few pages. I want there to be an element of intrigue. But I hear the hook example as being the flashy first sentence, and I don't really want that. Like I like the first sentence that Sandra gave with the Hunger Games. Like she woke up and Prim was not there. Like that is a very ordinary experience, and yet it's perfect. Like I love that first sentence when you first brought it up. I was like, yes, she's so right. So exactly, that's basically what I want. I want to know what I'm getting myself into. And if your first sentence is very unlike the rest of your book, then I don't want it there. It's not going to kill your chances with me. Like I would just tell you to snip it as an agent, but I feel like writers kind of obsess over it, and I don't think that that's really necessary.
Okay, very interesting. And Sandra, of course, I want to get to you, but let me kind of follow up with Shannon here for just a second here. This is one of the things that, like, to me, I like, writing some notes as you guys are going along. And one of the things that, like, kind of I was drawing from what you were saying is that, a good first page is really making you want to read more. And I think like some of Lauren's examples, I think were really good. And, like the rest of my family is dead. Like, okay, well, what happened? I want to know more about that, or, this was a love story until my sister sent me to hell. What happened? I want to know more, right? I want to read more. To me, that's kind of a hook. That's sort of how I look at it. Not necessarily like one opening line where, you're trying to, although that one that you gave, I think is definitely, yeah, but yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, where it fits the rest of the book. Anyway, so what, like, do you think the first page, like the most important thing is that it's making you want to read more, Shannon? And if that is kind of at the top of that list there, or near the top, what gets your interest and makes you want to read more? Is it just kind of a unique voice and interesting characters, or are you looking for something kind of specific, like something where you're like, oh, that makes me want more,
I do think it's a bit more general than like that makes me want to read more. Like I'm looking for a good tone, I'm looking for good voices. I feel like some of my experiences are a bit colored by the way that I look for a lot of like slow moving literary fiction. So I do not necessarily need like the hook immediately right off the bat. Like I like the, you know, my sister sent me to hell sort of immediate attention grabber, but that doesn't really crop up a lot in the stories that I acquire. So it's not super accurate to my experiences as an agent. I am more of like the girl wandering the moors for the 2 pages before, you know, she gets into doing something else. So I do think it's pretty general for me. I am just looking as a checklist, like, is the writing good? Is this character someone I'd be interested in learning more about? Do I feel like the tone suits the genre that you are writing in? Like, again, is it spooky for gothic? Is it commercial for middle grade sci-fi? Things like that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, fair. Okay. All right. Sandra, going back to the hook, how important is a hook for you?
Yeah, so I'm similar. It's so funny when I got this question. I was like, do I have a hook in my books? I don't know. And I think it's different for everybody, right? There's some writers who really want that hook and who excel at it, and there's some writers who don't even think about it, like myself. And I, as an agent, I appreciate both. If there's a good hook, and I'm like, oh yes, this is awesome. If there's not that like really catchy hook, like, my sister sent me to hell, I'm not going to pass up on a project just for that. I think the hook is something that, as an agent can be added in later, either by myself or an editor, or not added in at all. Like, I can give an example as somebody who is just finishing up revisions for my YA fantasy that's coming out next year. At no point was my editor like, we need a stronger first page hook. And so there, it just isn't something that a lot of agents will really be glaring at you for if you don't have it. And so again, I think it's something that if it comes natural, then that's amazing. If it doesn't come natural, then that's okay too. Because like Shannon and Lauren were saying, there are a lot of different elements that keep a reader going, right? It's not just the hook. The hook, it can be like a cherry on the top, but if a sundae doesn't have the cherry, like, you're still going to enjoy the sundae, right? Like, you still want the frosting, you're still going to enjoy the sprinkles. Like, it's okay if the cherry isn't there. You might not even like the cherry like Shannon, right? And so I think there's different flavors for everybody. And so when we talk about different elements, that's just one way to do that, right? But there are different elements that you can add to that first page that will keep people reading and keep people cheering for and rooting for the character. And so it's okay not to have those punchlines, but I think the biggest thing is just to have an opening page that makes the reader feel in some way, whether they're an agent, editor, or a reader, right? Just in some way. So for example, my this was a love story. So my sister send us to hell, that makes you laugh, and so that's a feeling, right? If you read the Hunger Games first page, where it's just like, it gives you a feeling of like empathy, right? And so I think that's really what you want to build in that first page, even outside of the hook, is just having something that makes people feel, whether that's XYZ feeling really strongly, will keep the people and the readers reading more than just focusing on like, I have to have a really good hook. Because again, if you promise somebody a sundae but you only deliver the cherry, then the people do want that sundae, right? The cherry isn't going to make up for the sundae, but you can have the sundae without the cherry.
Nice. Yeah, I love that analogy. All right. Cool. Okay, so I want to get to the question of kind of how do we ensure that voice and character are in that first page? How do we as writers like do that and get some of your feedback on that? But before that, let me work around with a couple other questions. I'm gonna start with Shannon, then Lauren, then Sandra on this one. So conflict. We've talked so much about, character and voice, and that sort of thing, and these are the important elements. And I think Sandra, is the one that mentioned that sometimes you can start to introduce the conflict, but sometimes it's really hard to do on the first page. I have seen Becky Chambers' Long Way to a Small Tiny Planet, or Small Angry Planet. Yeah, she did a great job of establishing some conflict, but it wasn't like the main conflict of the book. It was just like another kind of conflict to get you interested. Um, but I'd love to hear, again, starting with you, Shannon, like, how important is it to have conflict on that first page? If, clearly if it's the literary Lost in the Moors, maybe not that important, but like in general, are you really looking for conflict in the first page? Or again, is that like kind of another cherry on the sundae?
I think it's a cherry on the sundae. I think what I'm looking for is more tension than
Mhm.
conflict. I'm not necessarily looking for there to be a problem on the first page, but if we're going to go back to like the Mora's example, like she may be wandering the moors, there may not be any sort of immediate conflict. She's alone, she's in her thoughts, she's in her feelings. But the tension there could be, oh, I've been married off to this man that I don't know, and you know, my life is so horrible, or it could be, oh my God, this town is so creepy, I'm so cold outside. I want there to be an element of he's maybe a little uncomfortable in this situation, or there's just some sort of floating ambiguity. Like I think Sandra was the one who said it, I want to feel something, and tension is a great way to do that. If we're going back to, you know, kidlit, like middle grade sci-fi, like
Mhm.
the aliens do not need to touch down on page one, but maybe, you know, that 10-year-old kid is fighting with his sister about putting on, you know, the wrong jacket, or maybe the mom is in the kitchen making the wrong, burning the pancakes, or you know, maybe he throws in a sentence about how he's nervous because his parents have divorced. Like I do want some element of tension so I get to know the character a little bit more, but conflict is not necessary for me. And I think that's again going to, what kind of tension you establish is going to vary by genre. So I don't want to give like any specific examples, any more specific examples, but it's a big part of establishing character and to let you know that there is something here to be said and to be resolved in the future.
Like it. Yeah. Great answer. Lauren, same question.
Yeah, I love that. I was gonna say tension. So I feel like tension's the perfect thing. And I think for me, what I always, even as I start doing edits with my authors that I sign, you know, one of the things that I always talk to them about is like why this character and why this moment. Like you want to have some semblance of those why questions within those first couple of pages. So I think what Shannon is talking about with that like tension element is like what about this opening scene, this opening page, this opening internal dialogue, right? Like why are we starting the novel there? And so I feel like those elements of tension can be brought forth. And as Shannon was saying, like, yeah, we can have the aliens touchdown on page one for sure. Like that's a very easy, not easy way, but that's like a very immediate way to start the story. But you can pull it back to the morning of or the day before, or you know, however far back you want to do it. But there still needs to be that sense of tension on something's looming, like the conflict's coming, something is going to be there, and that is what pulls the reader into the story, because that tension I think is what keeps you going even once the plot hits, or you know, the proverbial whatever hits the fan. um that's what keeps the reader going. So at least for me, there needs to be a tension, a conflict. Doesn't need to be the tension or that conflict, but something needs to
Sure.
be there.
All
Let me
right,
just say that
Sandra. Oh,
looming is the perfect word that I was
Mhm.
looking for. Thank you for saying that. Yes.
So
uh,
I'm going to talk about tension, but I'm going to call it something else. I'm going to call it drama. So I feel like the opening pages, the opening page and the opening pages have to make you feel like there is drama either on the page or looming, the possibility of drama, right? Because at the end of the day, this is every single book is a story, and what keeps people intrigued with stories is usually is like drama. And it's so funny to say that, but it's so true. Whether it be in book form or on TV and film, right? We go because we want to see the drama unfold and what's going to happen. And the drama might be a love story, it might be, you know, a battle for the galaxy, it might be XYZ, but it's that drama that's going to draw us in, that possibility of seeing like drama unfold, but also the possibility of seeing drama that we can learn from sometimes, you know? Like,
mhm.
and so I think building that in the opening page is like, okay, cool, this is going to be an alien story, but maybe also it's going to be a story about a really shy kid learning, you know, to volunteer first for something they really want, or I think having that balance between the drama and also the possibility to learn something, and it doesn't have to, again, like I think that's all like the cherry if it can be fit into the first page and it works perfectly awesome. And then if it can't, like I think that opening chapter is a great place to find that balance. But I think we do need to have, in order for readers to want to keep reading, especially if we talk about like young readers who have like limited attention span, there does have to be that sense of like, okay, this is going to be the cool drama that I learned from this, or this is going to be the drama that unfolds in the story.
Yeah, makes sense. Drama, tension. We need something there. Yeah, and I love what you're saying that like we're kind of drawn to the drama. Let me ask you another kind of question, especially as a genre writer. Sometimes maybe we want to write kind of that boy on farm trope, and that's going to be kind of a boring introduction. And so one of the ways that you can kind of pull out a tool out of the tool belt and get people interested in stakes in the beginning is to do a prologue. Definitely common in like a epic fantasy, right? Set up kind of the big stakes and then transition chapter one, okay, boy on farm. We'll get there again eventually, but so when you're sort of thinking of a page one, are you considering that the chapter one, or are you considering it that prologue? And then how do you feel if there's sort of a voice shift between the two? And you know what? We'll start with Lauren again so that Shannon doesn't take what Lauren might want to say.
Sorry, you cut out there just a little bit for me, Nick. Could you just repeat again?
Sure. Talking about prologues and like whether or not you sort of view the prologue as page one, or if you view like chapter one as page one, and how do you feel if there's a little bit of a voice shift between like a prologue and a chapter one?
Okay, I am not the person to ask about prologues because I am so team prologue that I like anytime there's a prologue, I just love it. So I know that it's very contentious in literary circles. Like some people are team prologue, some people are not. So I feel like I tend to view prologues a little bit separately from like the first page. I know that most readers don't do that. They're like opening the book, the first page is the first page. They don't necessarily distinguish it. Um, I guess long answer short. I don't think the tone needs to be completely the same for prologue versus first page. I feel like there's a reason it's a prologue, not the first chapter, most of the time. So I feel like that differentiation, whether that's like tone or age or time, like there's something that sets it apart from the rest of the novel. So I think that that makes sense to me. I wouldn't necessarily say that like a tonal shift feels wrong. I think maybe if it read exactly the same, it would feel a little bit more wrong because I think I would be like, why isn't it just the first chapter? Like, why are we labeling it prologue? So I guess that's my very lengthy roundabout way of saying if you've got a prologue and everyone's telling you no prologue, feel free to send it my way.
Nice, nice. How about Sandra? You want to jump in here?
Sure, yeah. I actually completely agree with like everything Lauren said, and I feel like sometimes there's stories. I feel like that it. It's so funny, Lauren. You were talking about like you just don't want it to meld, and I feel like that is the biggest thing. Where sometimes I read prologues and stories where I'm just like, this doesn't need to be a prologue. This could just be the first chapter. But then there are stories where sometimes like you need a prologue to ground it, and I do feel like I like a Lord. I feel like for a prologue to work, at least for me, I need it to be different than the what the chapter is, and typically in a prologue you're following different characters anyway, and so you don't necessarily want it to feel exactly like you're following the character that is going to tell the rest of the story, right? But I do think the prologue does need some element again of like that drama, and I feel like prologues are basically for that. They're to ground the reader in like the setting and the world building, but also to ground the reader in like the potential drama. And so I feel like sometimes prologues work great in order to do that, and then sometimes prologues, again, like Lauren would say, like sometimes when they meld too close together, they can be the first chapter. But I've never rejected somebody just because of a prologue. And then for my authors, two of the things that I'm working on right now with my clients are going to have prologues, and again, it's just looking at those elements. I treat them a little bit different. I treat them separate but the same, right? Like we still need the prologue to have that interest building. We still need the prologue to bring the reader in. At the end of the day, like Shan was saying, like if somebody opens the book and they read page one, they're going to read page one of the prologue. They're not going to read page one of chapter one. And so those elements still have to be there, but I think that the prologue has to work separately but together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, really interesting that you're saying like fundamentally they should be like somewhat different, which makes sense. But like, so Shannon, same question, but then also like how different, Like there's got to be a point where it's too different, right? What is
Yeah, so I agree with everything that both of them have said, especially when it comes to being separate but working together. Like, I do believe, like, if you are going to have a prologue, it needs to be fundamentally different than your first chapter. Otherwise, like both of them have said, why would you not just then make it the first chapter? Um, for me, a prologue has to be doing something, and there has to be a reason for existing. Like you were sort of saying, if you have a very, very slow opening with the farm boy who, does not have any sort of relation to, magic or mysticism or kingdoms or anything like that, maybe you can put a prologue in about the king of darkness, so that when the farm boy sees the darkness over the horizon, the reader is like, oh, like I know something's going to happen. He doesn't. So there might not be any tension in that first chapter, but because of that prologue, you know that something's coming, and you know that that first chapter is an omen of things to come. So that is a pretty much like the purpose of a prologue for me is going to be like dragging in the reader if you know you have a slower opening.
Mhm.
But if you have an opening that is already catchy enough, why do you need the prologue?
Mhm.
Just as an example, I recently sold a duology. It's still under wraps, so I can't talk about it yet, which is unfortunate. But the author has originally submitted it to me with a prologue, and then her first chapter, on like the second page, like the real conflict started, and I was like, I think we need the prologue here. Like it's very cool, but you're already immediately engrossed in the story right away in chapter one. So we decided to cut the prologue and move it actually much later in the story. And then we sold it, and the editor was like, I'm so glad you didn't have a prologue. And we were both like, ooh.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
She was like, yeah, the story started in just the right place. And I feel like Lauren was talking about that earlier. Like, just start your story where it starts. And if where it starts is not super interesting, then maybe yes, add a prologue. Maybe that is like my thesis statement there.
Yeah.
So just try and predict, what's going to grab your reader's attention. And if you already have that in the first chapter, in your first pages, then maybe prologue is unnecessary.
Okay.
And I was also, the only thing I was gonna, I don't know if Sandra and Shannon, y'all experience this a lot, but in my work as developmental editor, a lot of the times it's like sometimes you got to cut like the first, I don't know, like 10 pages, 5 pages, wherever it ends up being for the writer. And I'm like, this is where the story should start. I don't know how often it happens for you, but some of the time that is where I end up finding something. So that also could be the prologue, right? Like what Shannon was doing, like cut the prologue and then let's start. So I have found a lot of the times where the writer thinks the story should start maybe isn't exactly where it should. So that's something though that obviously like an agent, an editor, developmental editor would go through and figure that out with you.
Yeah,
Is
I'll
that
just add that I do that like all the time. We're
Yeah.
like, okay, we need to start somewhere different. We
Yeah.
need to get X, Y, Z at the beginning. And so it's so funny when we talk about first pages. And again, I think that's why all of us have been saying, voice is so important, the first page, and all the different elements work together. Because sometimes the first page doesn't even end up being your first page, right? And so that's something to keep in mind too, I think.
okay? And then just kind of following on Lauren's point, Shannon, have you experienced that too, where you've worked with well, I mean, clearly, I guess you have, because you had the instance of that prologue where it was like, yeah, we don't actually need this here. So yes, sometimes we writers screw that up, I guess, huh? Yeah.
I feel like
Um,
there's sometimes writers who take like a beat to establish characterization or setting and things like that. And that's important, but we can just chop it up into finer pieces and sort of rearrange things.
yeah,
I'm a big rearranger. I usually love the content that my writers have submitted to me. I just want to move it somewhere else, and put more interesting things right at the beginning.
nice. So, and just following up on the prologue question, let me ask, and let's just kind of lightning round this real quick. When you're thinking about, a story with a prologue, do you obviously like that first page matters? That's how the reader is going to experience that book, that first page of that prologue. Do you look at that first page of the chapter the same way? The first page of like chapter one, it needs to like hit those very same notes of voice and character and be so strong that it's bringing people in? Or if it has that prologue, is it more like chapter one sort of becomes like chapter two, where of course it needs to be good, but it's not as important? Let's start with Shannon, then work around.
Yeah, I think this might be controversial, but I do kind of see it as a chapter two.
Okay.
To me, like kind of what I was saying earlier, um, if you have a prologue, then I do not necessarily feel like your first chapter is going to need to be attention grabbing because the prologue has already done that job for you.
Mhm,
So that's why I think prologues work a lot better with slower beginning stories, because
mhm.
that's what's going to grab the reader's attention. And then you can sort of just fade into a steadier, slower opening.
Fair. Lauren, question, same question.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's if you have a prologue and you have chapter one, you want to have like tension between the two. I'm trying to think of, I'm like likening it to, I've been watching a lot of like crime procedural shows. This is going to be a very weird tangent. You know how like the first opening scene is always like the murder or like the event or something, and then it cuts to the, and then you just like start in on the story. And I feel like some of the time, if you take out that beginning part, the rest of the episode doesn't work, right? Like if you miss the big how, it doesn't necessarily happen. So some of the time it's needed, and other times if you're gonna jump in on, I don't know, like a Game of Thrones, you want to just go from the beginning plot wise, watch the whole episode. You don't need the little vignette at the beginning. So I think it's so genre specific. I love that we just keep saying that. Sorry, this advice is so specific to specific genres, but I think it is genre specific, and I think it's honestly like what the story itself needs. But if there is a prologue, for me at least, I want to see it having some tension. Like, why is the prologue there? What is it setting up that's different than the first chapter?
Nice. And Sandra, same question.
It's so funny, Laura, because your mind went straight to like the detective shows, the crime stuff, and then my mind went straight to like science fiction. You know how in films we often see like the setup being like for Armageddon and like for Independence Day. It was like the aliens arriving, it's like the prologue, right? And then for Armageddon, it's like we see the comet coming towards the Earth, and that's like the prologue, right? And so that has already served as interest. And then when the story actually starts, it focuses on the characters, right? Because the characters, so the prologue, I feel like for science fiction, almost when we talk about genre, can work to set up the 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 big bad evil, right? But then what we're interested in is seeing how the characters survive that big bad evil. And so I just thought that was an interesting example of when we talk about prologues of the story of like seeing like, okay, this big looming evil is coming your way, and then that first chapter focusing more on like the characters and whose journey we're actually going to be following and why we should follow it and why we root for them on the page to survive the comet or survive the alien invasion. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about your prologue versus your first chapter.
Love it. Okay. All right. I got one last question and we're gonna wrap things up. This has already been fantastic. I feel like I've learned a lot. I want to go Sandra, then Lauren, then Shannon. Um, so we talked a lot about voice and character, right? I'd love to hear kind of a tip for getting the voice and character right, or what is something that you're sort of like looking for in terms of voice and character. How do you know when the voice and the character is like spot on and you're like this is a winner versus no, this is not hitting it?
So I think it's tough because there's no one right answer, right?
Sure.
Again, when we talk about things, the voice can depend on the genre, the expectations, what we're doing, etc. But I think the important thing is a few different things. Critique partners are really important to think about it. I think it's so funny because it reminds me of I don't know if you're all familiar with Shrek and how like ogres have layers, right? And I feel like books have layers too, and they all kind of like are separate from each other. So when we talk about like what can work together, well, the onion can be made in very many different layers. But when it comes together, that's like what we need, right? And so I think it's just a matter of really just seeing if the layers are there, if it's layered enough. If you only have one layer, maybe it's not enough layers. And so I think really taking a look at your pages and seeing like, do I have enough layers or do I have too many layers? Maybe sometimes you have too many layers and you want to simplify things. And I think the most important thing is just finding a balance between everything. Yes, my voice is pretty strong. Okay, cool. And then, okay, is my story pretty strong? Okay, cool. And then, are my characters pretty strong? Okay, cool. But it's really looking to make sure that that there are that you're not just looking at one thing, I think is probably the most important thing, is that you're making sure to look at all the things that work together in order to make this work as a whole.
Love it. Lauren?
I feel like it's so hard. I feel like there isn't an answer. Um, and I feel like that's the difficult part of an agent or an editor, is like it is so subjective. And some of the time, it could be working totally fine craft wise, and it's just like not the right fit. Like I feel like so many times I tell a writer like it's just not the right fit at this time, or it's just not working for me. And I know that writers hate that answer of it's just not for me, but some of the time like it really just boils down to it. Like it's just not working for what we're looking for. And I think what Sandra is saying with, different elements and having different equal parts of it, I always think of it like making an ice cream sundae, or I don't know, making like coffee is maybe the right way to say, like some people want like more foam, like more milk foam. Some people want like all espresso. Some people want just like only sugar. It's all the different elements, and everyone's going to have a preference for how they make their coffee, but all of them are the right way, right? It's just what works for you as a publishing professional and what works for the reader and the writer. So it's just finding the right balance and going from there.
Fair, fair. All right. Shannon, thoughts?
With the caveat that like things do work differently for every single agent and editor, I will say that one of the things that I notice is like a lack of immediacy in the person's brain when it comes to establishing voice and character. I get a lot of first pages, and this is a craft thing, where the main character is like, "Oh, I saw this, I felt that, um, I was sad," and that is just to me not a super effective way of establishing what a person is feeling in that moment. It's not a good way of establishing their mental state. I want to feel like they are a real person inhabiting a body. So like what are the sensations that they are feeling? Like what is the narrative that's going on in their head? I want there to be a sense of this is a real human being that I am just like now inhabiting as a reader. Um, like what is an example that I can give? I feel like I'm not being clear here. If I say a car splashed Ben on the way to school and he wasn't very happy about that, that to me reads very different than a car roared past Ben on the freeway, splashing with puddle water as if his morning couldn't get any goddamn worse. Like that to me reads a bit more in the moment, and I get more
Right.
of a sense of this grumpy feeling and tone that this
Right.
character is going for. So
Bit more
that is
voice there, right?
a bit more voice,
Yeah.
a bit more description, a bit more of like he's soaked, he's wet, he's miserable, rather than just like, oh, this happens and it kind of sucked. Like that to me is very, very different. And that is very important to me, especially in like middle grade and young adult where voice is like king, to establish that sense of immediacy in the body and in the mind.
I love that. I love that. And kind of yeah, I like the idea of, your character needs to have a body, and they also, if characters are real people, they need to have real opinions, kind of drawing from Lauren's thing about coffee. Like everyone likes their coffee a specific way, right? Yeah, you could like the foam, the espresso, whatever. Someone's gonna like it, but your character ought to have a favorite coffee and better demand that it be that kind of coffee if they're gonna be an interesting character, right? Um, cool. Well, this has been really lovely. I appreciate all of your time. Thank you for joining me. Um, Let's go around. I would love for each of you to share too where folks can find and follow you online. And if you want to share a little bit too about, I know we kind of touched on a little bit in the top, but what sorts of things you're looking for, this might be a good place to plug that also. Sorry, Sandra, let's start with you and go Lauren and Shannon.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us here today, guys. Y'all. You can find me basically I'm mostly active on Instagram and Twitter, at Sandra Proudman, literally just my name. I'm also on like TikTok and XYZ, what is it, like Blue Sky, Threads, everywhere, but I'm not very active. So again, Twitter and Instagram are probably the places that I'm most active. And in terms of what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for a little bit of everything, honestly, but I'm really, really hungry for things like rom-coms for marginalized voices, contemporary stories. I really, really want stories that have meaning to them right now. I feel like we really need stories who teach the world about XYZ topic. And so I'm really interested in issues-driven contemporary stories, but I also really love just people having fun and going on adventures. And so I really love speculative fiction as well. So everything from horror to grounded science fiction to fantasy, contemporary fantasy. I think those are generally the things that I'm looking for.
Nice. All right, Lauren.
Yeah, so I am mostly have migrated over to Instagram. I'm still kind of lingering around on Twitter though. On Twitter, I think I'm Lauren Gilmore 03, and everywhere else I am Lauren T. Davila. And then my website, laurentdavila.com, you can find me there as well. In terms of what we're looking right now, we're closed to open submissions. If you do decide to query me, you can just query me directly, mention that you were a part of WriteHive, and I'd be more than happy to review your query. I think right now I'm looking for sci-fi in general. We've got a lot of fantasy coming up for us over the next couple of years. So, looking mostly for sci-fi. Also would love to see some horror as well. And I'm always open for short story anthologies. So if you have a themed antho, please send them my way.
Cool. And Shannon.
You can find me technically on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is going to be SM and then my last name for Shannon Marie Lechon. And I am kind of a social media hermit, so none of my profiles are very active, but you can totally slide into my DMs literally at any point. It's the only reason why I still have those apps is I just use them as like a weird messaging system. So I would love to hear from you guys. And what I am looking for is middle grade YA and adult science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, and mysteries. So pretty much the whole gamut of genre fiction. And in terms of types and tones, I do tend to lean towards the darker side of things. I love my gothics, I love my literary works. I love things that maybe seem a bit bleaker, but still have that little kernel of hope inside of them. Everyone at my agency knows that if they have something that is really strange and kind of unmarketable, to slide it my way, because I really love stuff that feels really original and fresh and like I have never seen it ever before in my entire life, whether or not editors are on my page or not, I don't know, but I really love just seeing stuff that is completely unknown to me. So if you have something that's really weird and strange, please send it my way.
Love it. And I'm Nicolas W. Fuller. I've got a booktube where I interview authors and stuff. You can find it at YouTube at Nicolas W. Fuller. You can see my newsletter, Patreon/Nicolas W. Fuller, or check out my website. You can find links to both of those. It's, you guessed it, nicolaswfuller.com. Thank you three lovely ladies for being here. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of WriteHive. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much for having
everybody.
us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.